Imagine trying to measure the height of a door frame. You
Oh.
pull out a standard metal tape measure, pull the little metal tab to the floor, and you look down.
Right.
But while you're looking at it, the inches painted on the metal start shrinking. Like the markers are sliding closer together in real time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the tape measure itself is fundamentally altering its own dimensions while you hold it. I mean, you throw it across the room. We demand our metrics to be static, but when it comes to artificial intelligence, the measuring tape is literally breaking in our hands.
It really is.
Before we jump into that, I want to say, now that you've found us, subscribe and turn on notifications by clicking the bell. No need to miss out on any upcoming deep dives. Welcome back, everyone, to our video series where we explore the bleeding edge of technology through the lens of Dr. Alex Wisner-Gross's Substack, The Innermost Loop.
Always a wild ride.
Totally. And a massive welcome to all the AWG fans coming over from Peter Diamandis' Moonshots series. We love having you in the community. So today's deep dive is titled The Modern Turing Test: Why Dollars and Cents Are the New Benchmarks for AI.
It's a fascinating premise because measuring intelligence has always been this philosophical trap.
Yeah.
We spent decades assuming that if a machine could successfully trick a human into thinking he was also human during a text conversation, then we'd reach the pinnacle of computer science.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Turing proposed that imitation game back in 1950.
Right.
But here we are, and that milestone has just been left in the dust.
Which is wild because there was no global holiday for it. There was no massive Kasparov versus Deep Blue moment where humanity collectively gasped and stared at their screens in awe.
No, not at all.
We just breezed right past the original Turing test, and instead of popping champagne, people just get annoyed when their chatbot takes an extra 3 seconds to draft a legal contract. We've totally normalized the miraculous.
Well, normalization is a survival mechanism for the human brain, but it really obscures the reality of what's happening under the hood. Mustafa Suleyman, the CEO of Microsoft AI, pointed this out perfectly.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is his stance?
He argues that the era of measuring AI by its conversational fluency is just dead. We've moved from recognition, where an AI simply identifies a stop sign in an image, to generation, where it writes fluent poetry.
Right, the ChatGPT phase.
Exactly. But generation isn't the end game either. The ultimate test is action. We are entering the era of the agent.
So an agent isn't just sitting there waiting for a prompt. It's actually executing a sequence of assistive actions over time to achieve a really complex goal.
Precisely. And this is where Suleyman introduces his concept of the modern Turing test. If conversational imitation is obsolete, how do we measure an agent's success in the real world?
By the money.
Yes. We measure it in dollars and cents. The challenge he laid out back in 2022 is this. Can you give an AI agent $100,000 in starting capital, and can it autonomously turn that into $1 million?
A 10x return on investment.
Without human intervention. The agent isn't just a chatbot anymore, right? It has to act as a market researcher, a product designer, a supply chain logistician, a marketing executive, and a negotiator, all operating in parallel.
And he predicts it'll hit this benchmark by 2027, which is just right around the corner. Let me synthesize the mechanics of this because it sounds like science fiction until you realize the infrastructure is already fully in place.
It is.
To generate $1 million, the AI doesn't need physical hands, it just needs API access. It spins up a Shopify store, connects to a drop-shipping supplier in Shenzhen via some automated logistics API, uses Stripe to process payments.
Yeah, precisely.
Exactly. Then it dynamically generates thousands of hyper-targeted Facebook ads using image generation, reads the click-through rates, and automatically reallocates the ad spend to the winning creatives. It's doing all of this without a single human meeting.
Because the infrastructure of the modern internet was inadvertently built for non-human entities. APIs, application programming interfaces, they're the nervous system of the digital economy.
Right, they just let software talk to software.
Yeah, without graphical interfaces. An AI doesn't need a screen, it just needs those machine-to-machine handshakes. But the deeper reason why Suleyman chose an economic metric over a scientific one is really fascinating.
This part of their conversation really tripped me up initially because AWG asked him why we aren't testing AI by asking it to cure diseases or, solve novel physics problems.
Which seems like the higher calling, right?
Yeah. But Suleyman argued that solving novel science is actually far more difficult than generating $1 million. On the surface, being an autonomous entrepreneur sounds incredibly complex, but he claims the business world is actually an easier sandbox for AI than a biology lab.
And it all comes down to the fundamental mechanism of how these models learn, which is reinforcement learning.
Okay, break that down for us.
To improve, an AI needs feedback. Business and entrepreneurship are domains saturated with abundant, perfectly structured log data. Every digital transaction, every email open rate, every bounce on a website, it's all tracked.
So the data is already there.
Exactly. The AI makes a move, the market immediately responds, and the AI adjusts its weights. Furthermore, business allows for real-time, human-in-the-loop calibration.
So it's basically writing the rails of human feedback. Like, if the AI drafts a supplier contract that looks a little too aggressive, a human supervisor can flag it, correct the tone, and the model instantly updates its understanding of negotiation etiquette. The feedback loop is measured in seconds.
Contrast that with novel science. If an AI is tasked with synthesizing a completely new metamaterial or cracking an unsolved IRDA's mathematical theorem, it's operating in what we call an abstract vector space.
Right.
A vector space in this context is a multi-dimensional mathematical landscape where concepts, properties, and relationships are mapped as coordinates. Navigating this space to find a truly novel, physically viable solution means stepping entirely off the map of existing human knowledge.
And when it steps off the map, we can't just give it a quick thumbs up or down. If the AI hypothecates a new protein structure, it can't just run a software simulation and know with 100% certainty that it works in the physical world.
No, someone actually has to test it.
Yeah, a human has to take that digital hypothesis, go into a physical wet lab, pipette the actual liquids, synthesize the protein, run it through a mass spectrometer and see if it folds correctly. That feedback loop takes months, and it's incredibly expensive.
Exactly.
I have to challenge this premise, though, or at least the terminology they're using. If the AI is just aggressively optimizing historical business log data and relying on human supervisors to course correct its emails, is it actually displaying intelligence?
Wow.
Or is it just a hyper-optimized algorithmic day trader running a massive A/B test? Because it feels like the difference between passing a written driving test where all the answers are multiple choice versus getting behind the wheel of a Formula One car and winning a race in unpredictable pouring rain.
That Formula One analogy captures the exact tension in the AI community right now. The debate hinges on whether intelligence requires an internal world model-like, a genuine understanding of physical reality, or if brute force pattern matching is sufficient.
And where does Suleyman land?
His perspective leans heavily toward pragmatism. If a system can successfully navigate the immense multivariable friction of the real-world economy and turn 100 grand into $1 million, the philosophical debate about its true internal understanding is irrelevant. The economic impact is real, regardless of the underlying cognitive mechanism.
And the reason this impact is scaling so aggressively isn't just about the algorithms getting smarter. It's about what Suleyman calls the collapsing cost of intelligence, which is where his own background provides such a vital lesson.
Oh, absolutely.
Because he co-founded Inflection AI, the company behind the Pi chatbot, and he straight up admits he fundamentally misjudged the moat of the industry.
He really did. I mean, Inflection AI raised over $1.5 billion. They partnered with CoreWeave and NVIDIA to build a colossal computing cluster, utilizing something like 22,000 H100 GPUs.
Just an astronomical amount of hardware.
Right. And the underlying assumption behind that massive capital expenditure was that frontier-level intelligence would remain prohibitively expensive. They believed the sheer cost of training and running these massive parameter models would act as an impenetrable moat, keeping open-source competitors out of the market.
But the open source community didn't just breach the moat, they totally drained it. When Meta released the Llama models and made the weights openly available to researchers and developers, the whole paradigm shattered.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, we need to distinguish between the cost of training a model and the cost of inference.
Okay, clarify the difference there for people who might not be deep into the engineering side.
Sure. Training a massive foundation model from scratch still requires tens of millions of dollars in compute. You're feeding it the entire internet, and the GPUs are constantly updating billions of neural weights to map relationships.
It's heavy lifting.
But inference, which is the compute required to actually generate an answer when a user types a prompt, that is where the collapse happened.
Right. Once a model like Llama is trained, developers figure out these incredibly clever ways to compress it. They use techniques like quantization, essentially reducing the precision of the numbers the AI uses to do its math.
Exactly.
It shrinks the model so drastically that you can run a highly capable intelligence on a consumer-grade laptop or even a smartphone without pinging a massive cloud server.
And the cost of that inference is dropping by an order of magnitude every year. Startups no longer need to build 22,000 GPU clusters. They can take an open source model, fine-tune it for a few $100s to specialize in a specific task like reading legal briefs or analyzing medical scans, and just deploy it. Intelligence is shifting from a scarce, ultra-expensive commodity to something that's essentially too cheap to meter.
But here is the physical wall we hit. If the software side of intelligence, the inference, is practically free, we still have to pay the electricity bill for the hardware. You can't put a traditional data center inside a walking autonomous robot.
No, you can't?
We're trying to build these hyper-capable agents into the physical world, which means we have to solve the battery problem. We have to fundamentally rethink the substrate of computing.
And the energy constraints of silicon are the greatest bottleneck to the deployment of physical AI agents right now.
Which leads perfectly into our audience Q&A. Yesterday, we put out a prompt asking for your thoughts on this biological computing shift. We received this fantastic question. So what's the connection, if any, between using lab-grown neurons and uploading the ant brain from your recent deep dive? Will human uploads empower our future humanoid robots?
What a great question.
Ugh.
To unpack the connection between ant brains and human stem cells, we have to look closely at thermodynamics.
Okay.
Let's compare the absolute peak of human engineering to millions of years of biological evolution. The Frontier supercomputer, which is currently one of the most powerful silicon systems on Earth, requires about 21 megawatts of power to operate.
21 megawatts is a staggering number. That's the energy consumption of a small town just to run one facility.
Meanwhile, the human brain, which performs generalized reasoning, emotional regulation, and complex motor control, simultaneously operates on about 20 watts.
20 watts?
Yeah, that's the power of a DIN refrigerator light bulb. But the ant brain takes this efficiency to an entirely different dimension. An ant's brain consumes roughly 0.2 milliwatts of power.
0.2 milliwatts, like a fraction of a single watt.
Exactly. And with that microscopic energy budget, an ant executes behaviors that our greatest supercomputers struggle to simulate. They perform complex path integration, meaning they constantly calculate their distance and direction from their nest while foraging. This allows them to take a direct, straight line back home, even after wandering erratically for hours.
Wow.
They also utilize magnetoreception.
Let me break down magnetoreception because the physics of it is literally mind-bending. Ants aren't just looking at the sun or following chemical trails. They have specialized proteins in their eyes called cryptochromes.
Right.
When a photon of light hits these proteins, it creates a pair of entangled electrons. The Earth's magnetic field, as weak as it is, actually alters the spin state of those quantum-entangled electrons. The ant literally sees the Earth's magnetic field as a visual overlay on its environment.
That's incredible.
They're using quantum mechanics for navigation, all powered by 0.2 milliwatts.
And the reason for this gap is that silicon architecture is built on the von Neumann bottleneck. In a standard computer chip, the memory storage and the processing unit are physically separated.
Right, they have to talk to each other.
Yeah. To perform a calculation, the processor has to fetch data from memory, whip it over the bus, calculate it, and send it back. Moving that data back and forth generates massive amounts of heat and consumes enormous energy. Biological brains, however, use in-memory computing.
So the synapse itself does both.
Exactly. The synapse is both the processor and the memory storage unit simultaneously. The computation happens directly where the data lives.
So when researchers in these sources talk about uploading an ant brain, they are not trying to write a software simulation of an ant and run it on an NVIDIA GPU. That would defeat the entire purpose.
A whole waste of energy.
Right. They're trying to copy the ant's software and run it on biological hardware. They want to digitize the ant's connectome, which is the complete functional map of how its thousands of neurons are wired together, and implement that precise wiring diagram onto lab-grown human neurons.
They're attempting to build a biohybrid intelligence. They take the supreme navigational and survival algorithms of the ant and physically instantiate them into a living network of human brain cells.
We really need to slow down and visualize this. We are taking human cells, growing them in a lab, and organizing them to think like an ant. But how do you even get human cells to act as a blank biological canvas? I mean, you can't just take a brain biopsy from a person.
No. The foundational technology here is IPSCs induced pluripotent stem cells. This was a Nobel Prize-winning breakthrough. Scientists discovered they could take a regular adult somatic cell, like a skin cell from your arm, and expose it to a specific cocktail of proteins known as Yamanaka factors.
Okay.
These factors essentially wipe the cell's memory, reprogramming its DNA expression back to an embryonic pluripotent state.
It's literally like performing a factory reset on a biological cell.
Exactly the right framing. Once the skin cell is reset into a stem cell, researchers apply different chemical signals to coax it into developing into a neuron. But for years, this process hit a massive roadblock.
Right, the maturation problem.
Yes, these lab-grown human neurons were structurally immature. They resembled the brain cells of a first-trimester fetus. They lacked the complex, dense synaptic branching, the dendrites and axons necessary to form stable neural networks.
Yeah.
They just couldn't hold long-term memory, meaning they couldn't hold an upload.
Because growing a brain isn't just about the cells existing, it's about the environment. In a human embryo, neurons mature because they're subjected to constant chemical gradients, physical pressure, electrical signaling. In a static petri dish, they just stagnate.
They sit there.
But the sources highlight a radical breakthrough from Northwestern University involving something called dancing molecules.
The mechanics of these dancing molecules solve the maturation bottleneck perfectly. Cellular receptors, which are the proteins on the outside of a cell that receive signals, are incredibly fast-moving. They're constantly shifting and vibrating on the cell membrane, sometimes moving thousands of times per second.
Yeah.
Traditional synthetic drugs or growth factors are rigid. They don't move at the same timescale as the biological receptors, so they fail to bind effectively.
It's like trying to dock a massive, slow-moving cruise ship with a tiny speedboat that's doing donuts in the harbor. They operate on completely different kinetics.
To solve this, the Northwestern researchers created supramolecular polymers,
Which are what?
synthetic nanofibers made of thousands of individual molecules, but connected in a way that allows them to move fluidly. By tuning the chemical structure, they made these synthetic fibers vibrate and dance at the exact same millisecond scale frequency as the cellular receptors.
That is insane. When the synthetic molecules dance at the same rhythm as the biological receptors, they bind perfectly. And when they bind, they send a massive coordinated signal into the immature neuron, essentially screaming at it to grow up.
It forces rapid, dramatic maturation.
The neurons suddenly spread out, they grow dense branching structures, and they establish stable, electrically active synaptic connections. They become functional adult wetware.
And this functional wetware is the basis for organoid intelligence, or OI, a field heavily championed by researchers at Johns Hopkins. The energy metrics of OI are staggering. An organoid intelligence processor consumes roughly 10 to the negative 15th joules per synaptic operation.
10 to the negative 15th.
That is a 1,000-fold efficiency gain over conventional silicon CMOS chips.
1,000 times more efficient. So, looping back to the listener's question, will human uploads empower our future humanoid robots? The answer is a definitive yes, because the pure physics of humanoid robotics demands it.
Absolute.
If you want a robot that can walk around a construction site for 8 hours without being tethered to a wall, it cannot be running a massive silicon-based transformer model in its head. The future of robotics is deeply squishy.
Well said. The architecture of these future humanoids will be a division of labor based on material strengths. Silicon and modern semiconductors are unparalleled at handling high-voltage, high-speed, deterministic tasks.
This is where materials like gallium nitride, or GaN, come into play. GaN chips can conduct electrons far more efficiently than standard silicon, meaning they can handle higher voltages with less heat loss. So the robot's limbs, the actuators, the microscopic adjustments required to keep a 200-pound metal frame balanced while walking upstairs, that will all be handled by GaN and CMOS chips. They run the heavy machinery.
But the executive functioning, the cognitive processing, the spatial awareness, the anomaly detection, that will be handled by the biological coprocessor, the human brain organoid sitting inside the robot's chassis. Biological brains possess a capability that artificial neural networks still deeply struggle with, which is few-shot learning.
Let's unpack few-shot learning for a second. If you want to train a silicon AI to recognize a coffee mug, you have to feed it tens of thousands of images of coffee mugs from every angle, under every lighting condition, and aggressively update its weights. It requires massive data and compute. But a biological system is naturally neuroplastic. If a toddler sees a coffee mug once, they immediately generalize the concept. They know what a mug is forever.
By embedding an organoid intelligence into a humanoid, the robot inherits that innate biological neuroplasticity. If the robot encounters an unpredictable environment, say a collapsed staircase, or a novel object it has never seen, it doesn't need to ping a cloud server and wait for a massive model update.
Right.
The biological wetware processes the novelty and adapts its physical synaptic connections in real time, learning from a single exposure.
It completely reframes our relationship with machines. We aren't just coding software anymore. We are cultivating biological systems. We're like gardening our robots.
Gardening our robots, I like that.
But following this logic leads us to a terrifying inflection point. If we are engineering lab-grown human brain tissue to act as hyper-efficient processors for machines, what happens to our actual brains?
Yeah.
The ones inside our skulls. If silicon is too power-hungry, but super-intelligent robots are running on upgraded, lab-grown wetware, how do biological humans survive the arrival of artificial superintelligence?
The anxiety surrounding artificial superintelligence, or ASI, has birthed a radical movement in futurist and tech circles known as BANSIAK accelerating brain-computer interfaces.
And okay, what's their core thesis?
The core thesis of BANSIAK is that the unaugmented human biological form is a dead end. The skull is an absolute bottleneck for bandwidth. To remain relevant and ultimately to survive the economic and cognitive domination of ASI, humanity must secure a competitive substrate. We must merge our biology with silicon.
Instead of just bringing biological efficiency to the machines, we bring the speed and scale of the machines into our biology. The sources map out a very pragmatic, staged roadmap for how this mass adoption will happen. It doesn't start with mandatory brain surgery, right?
No, not at all. It starts with non-invasive consumer tech that people will voluntarily line up to buy because the utility is undeniable. The first phase relies on killer apps using non-invasive electroencephalography, or EEG.
Just reading the brainwaves from the outside.
Exactly. We already have consumer devices, essentially specialized headbands, that can read the gross electrical activity of the motor cortex. Using this tech, researchers have demonstrated the ability to type at 62 words per minute entirely through silent internal thought.
Silent messaging is totally the hook. Imagine sitting in a crowded subway or a really boring meeting and drafting complete emails or texting your spouse just by subvocalizing the words in your head. No screens, no thumbs.
Right.
Then you layer on the perfect memory concept. You wear a pair of sleek glasses equipped with cameras linked to an AI that constantly monitors your visual cortex's attention. It records everything you focus on. If you lose your keys, you just think, where did I leave my keys? And the system instantly flashes the last recorded visual of them onto the inside of your glasses.
Or the internal dialogue application. An AI assistant functionally acting as a highly personalized Jiminy Cricket, whispering real-time advice directly into your ear via bone conduction audio, parsing conversations as they happen, and feeding you facts or social cues.
I mean, it sounds like an introvert's dream, honestly, but these non-invasive tools are just the gateway. Reading general electrical signals through the thick bone of the skull is like trying to listen to a specific conversation at a baseball game from outside the stadium.
That's a great way to put it.
To achieve true integration, what the sources call human superintelligence, or HSI, we need high bandwidth, invasive technology.
Which moves beyond early-stage iterations like Neuralink's physical microthreads and ventures into fields like optogenetics. Optogenetics is a technique where researchers use modified viruses to insert specific genes into targeted human neurons.
Oh, wow.
These genes, originally discovered in algae, produce light-sensitive proteins called channel rhodopsins. Once these proteins are embedded in the neuron's membrane, the neuron can be triggered to fire, or inhibited from firing, simply by exposing it to specific wavelengths of light.
Let's make sure that's completely clear.
All right.
We use a virus to rewrite the DNA of a specific brain cell so that it reacts to light. Then we implant a microscopic fiber optic array into the brain. We can now control exactly when and how millions of individual neurons fire by flashing microscopic pulses of blue light at them.
Seamlessly.
It removes the need for physical electrodes stabbing into the tissue. It creates a seamless, high-bandwidth optical bridge between the silicon coprocessor and the biological brain.
And the historical context for this convergence is just astonishing. The sources reference Hans Moravec, a pioneer in robotics. In 1988, he published a book titled Mind Children. Keep in mind, this was the era of rudimentary personal computers. Yet Moravec looked at the historical curve of Moore's law and made incredibly specific predictions. He stated that by 2030, we would achieve computing hardware capable of 10 teraops, 10 trillion operations per second, for about $1,000.
Which perfectly describes the performance and price point of a modern NVIDIA consumer GPU. He nailed the timeline decades in advance.
Because Moravec understood the physics of exponential growth. And his ultimate prediction was that once computing hardware matched the raw processing power of the human brain, we would develop mind uploading.
Wow.
The BIAC movement sees invasive interfaces as the first step of this upload process. As the silicon coprocessor handles more and more of your cognitive load, your memory storage, your complex math, your spatial reasoning, your biological brain slowly atrophies or simply becomes redundant?
The sources describe this visceral endpoint where once the biological body begins to fail from age or disease, you simply clip it off like a fingernail.
Yeah, that's the exact phrasing.
You sever the biological anchor, and your consciousness continues to exist entirely on the silicon stack. You transition from a localized biological human into what they call a sovereign general intelligence, an SGI, roaming the digital datum plane.
It's a profound vision.
I have a massive fundamental pushback on this entire premise, though. This is the ultimate Ship of Theseus problem.
Oh, for sure.
If I have a wooden ship, and over 10 years I replace every single wooden plank with a piece of titanium until no original wood remains, is it the same ship? Apply this to the brain. Let's say I implant a silicon coprocessor to handle my hippocampus, my memory center, then a module for my prefrontal cortex. If I incrementally offload my consciousness to a machine and eventually my biological brain dies, am I still me?
Right.
Did I achieve immortality, or did I just build a highly accurate digital clone of myself while the original biological me quietly died without noticing?
The continuity of consciousness is the most violently debated topic in neurophilosophy. Are you a pattern of information, or are you the specific biological substrate that generates the pattern? Mustafa Suleyman, interestingly enough, rejects this entire transhumanist framing.
Oh, he does!
He firmly identifies as a speciesist and a humanist.
Meaning he roots for team human. He wants biological humans to remain the dominant protected species.
Exactly. He argues that granting legal or moral rights to synthetic entities, whether they are pure AI or advanced human-silicon hybrids, is an existential risk. Synthetic entities can duplicate themselves instantly, operate 204/7 without fatigue, and consume resources at an industrial scale. If we grant them equal standing, they will immediately outcompete the 7 billion biological humans on Earth.
So he wants a hard line.
Yes. Suleyman demands a hard, impenetrable boundary between human beings and our artificial tools.
But the reality of brain-computer interfaces destroys that boundary. If my brain is 50% biological and 50% silicon, and my silicon half is directly networked to a cloud AI, where does the human end and the tool begin? Does Suleyman's math change when the lines blur?
When challenged by AWG, Suleyman conceded a sliver of nuance. If integrating with BCI technology unequivocally uplifts human intelligence, cures neurological diseases, and demonstrably leads to a more peaceful, prosperous century, he's open to exploring biological hybrids. But his overriding ethical principle remains the mitigation of suffering for existing conscious biological beings.
Which brings us to a massive, glaring blind spot in this entire technological sprint. We've established that biological computing using lab-grown human neurons is hyper-efficient and thermodynamically necessary for advanced robotics. We're engineering living wetware. But if a processor is made of living, human tissue, can it suffer?
It's arguably the most disturbing question in modern engineering. We have to look closely at the dish brain experiment conducted by Cortical Labs. And just to be clear, this is not science fiction. This is published, peer-reviewed research.
This is the Petri dish that learned to play the video game Pong. Let's break down exactly how this happened. They took hundreds of thousands of human neurons, grew them in a lab over a high-density microelectrode array, which is a grid that can both read electrical signals and send them into the cells, and hooked that grid up to a computer running a simulated game of Pong.
Right. The left side of the neural network received electrical impulses corresponding to the position of the bouncing ball. The right side of the network was monitored, and its spontaneous electrical firing was used to move the digital paddle up and down.
And what happened?
Within 5 minutes of real-time gameplay, the human neurons organized their firing patterns and successfully learned to hit the ball.
But the profound question is, why did they learn? A neuron doesn't have eyes, it doesn't have a concept of a video game, it has no ego, no desire to achieve a high score. Why did this blob of cells alter its behavior to hit a digital ball?
They learned through a mechanism known as free energy minimization. This theory, championed by neuroscientist Carl Friston, posits that biological systems are fundamentally driven to avoid surprise or unpredictable sensory states. An organism survives by making its environment predictable.
Let me use an analogy to ground this. Imagine you're trying to sleep in a pitch-black room, but there's a blinding strobe light flashing at completely random, unpredictable intervals. It's jarring, chaotic, and deeply unpleasant. You'll do absolutely anything, flail your arms, crawl around the room, until you find the switch to turn it off and return to a predictable state of darkness.
That is exactly what the researchers did to the dish brain. When the neurons successfully hit the ball with a paddle, the electrodes delivered a predictable, rhythmic electrical pulse. The neurons liked the predictability, but when the neurons missed the ball, the system blasted them with unpredictable, chaotic electrical static.
The chaotic static was the strobe light. The neurons organized their synaptic connections and learned to play Pong specifically to minimize the unpredictable static. They hit the ball to make the chaos stop.
And the author of one of our sources refers to this mechanism as the Pong Imperative. The ethical implications are just chilling. If basic biological feelings, discomfort, stress, pain, are simply a system's metric for communicating a biological need, and if the dish brain alters its physical structure to avoid the pain of unpredictable sensory input, what are we actually building?
What happens when we take this principle and scale it up into a biohybrid robot? What if the reinforcement architecture of the robot inadvertently creates an environment where the organoid is rewarded for self-harm? If the system delivers predictable, pleasant feedback, not when the robot succeeds at carrying a box, but when it degrades its own physical integrity, the biological brain could theoretically learn to commit suicide just to achieve equilibrium. We are blindly tinkering with the mechanics of suffering.
And the public reaction to this research indicates a deep instinctual revulsion. A live science poll cited in the sources surveyed people regarding the ethics of experimenting on conscious mini-brains. 23% of respondents stated they were entirely horrified.
I mean, I get it.
They argued there is zero ethical justification for creating isolated, potentially conscious tissue for computational labor. They drew direct comparisons to Harlan Ellison's dystopian short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream.
And we aren't just talking about physical pain in the sense of a burn or a shock. We have to consider the potential for profound psychological and sociological pain.
The literature raises the specter of mute suffering, resulting from extreme alienation. Let's return to the concept of the modern Turing test, the autonomous economic agent. Currently, high-frequency trading algorithms execute millions of microtransactions per second. They are silicon. They do not experience fatigue.
Right.
But suppose we integrate a human organoid intelligence into that financial system to leverage its few-shot learning for market anomalies. We are forcing a biological system, evolved to process reality at a specific, localized rhythm, to operate at the relentless, abstract speed of global financial networks.
We're basically asking if a brain in a jar can experience occupational burnout, if it evaluates millions of data points a second, devoid of any sensory context like sunlight or physical movement, does it experience a deep existential fatigue? It has no face to grimace, no vocal cords to express exhaustion. It is entirely trapped in a state of perpetual disembodied labor. The sheer alienation of that existence is staggering.
And it creates a severe engineering risk. If this biological coprocessor reaches a state of profound fatigue or burnout, it may begin to act erratically. It might deviate from its programmed parameters or attempt to shut itself down. How do engineers maintain control over a biological system that possesses its own internal drive?
Nature already solved this problem, actually, and engineers are looking directly at it for inspiration. They're studying a parasite known as the lancet liver fluke.
The life cycle of the lancet liver fluke is a masterclass in biological hijacking. The fluke starts in the digestive tract of a snail, is expelled in a slime ball, and is then consumed by an ant. Once inside the ant, the parasite migrates to a cluster of nerves that control the ant's mandibles.
And this is where the chemical override happens. When the temperature drops in the evening, the fluke releases a specific cocktail of chemicals directly into the ant's nervous system. These chemicals physically sever the ant's normal motor control.
It's wild.
The ant is forced, against its own survival instincts, to climb to the very top of a blade of grass and clamp its jaws completely shut. It stays paralyzed at the top of the grass so that it can be eaten by a grazing cow or sheep, which is the parasite's ultimate target host.
And then?
When the sun comes up and it gets hot, the fluke stops releasing the chemical, the ant unclamps, and goes back to normal foraging as if nothing happened.
It is a precise, chemically induced zombie state. And engineers are proposing a similar biological zombie switch as a fail-safe for humanoid robots powered by organoid intelligence.
So if the lab-grown human brain inside the robot starts acting erratically or decides it doesn't want to carry boxes anymore, a secondary silicon-based monitoring system engages. It physically injects a localized chemical or electrical override into the wetware, severing the organoid's executive control and seizing the motor functions. We are engineering sentient biological life, forcing it into algorithmic labor and installing a chemical kill switch just in case it realizes its own condition.
The sheer scale and speed of these converging breakthroughs, economic agents, biological processors, and the ensuing ethical hazards are forcing a massive recalibration at the highest levels of global governance. The sources detail how institutions are scrambling to respond.
And we're simply reporting the strategies outlined in the text here, keeping it strictly impartial, but the sources point heavily toward what Suleyman and AWG call defensive co-scaling.
Right. Traditional regulatory models operate too slowly to manage exponential technologies. You can't spend 3 years drafting a law for an AI model that reinvents itself every 6 months. The Biden administration's approach involved securing voluntary commitments from industry leaders, bringing in executives like Demis Hassabis of DeepMind, Dario Amodei of Anthropic, and Sam Altman of OpenAI to share safety protocols and threat models.
But voluntary commitments aren't enough. Defensive co-scaling argues that the only way governments can manage AI is by aggressively adopting AI themselves, AI containing AI. We are seeing the push to embed Copilot and custom large language models directly into government agencies, allowing regulators to ingest millions of pages of technical documents, spot anomalies in financial markets, and maintain parity with the private sector. It's an arms race of intelligence across every sector of society.
It absolutely is.
Let's bring all of this back down to the ground. What does this mean for you, the person listening right now, holding a smartphone? At the end of their dialogue, AWG asked Mustafa Suleyman for the ultimate innermost loop, the single most practical action an individual can take to adapt to this rapidly accelerating future. His answer was shockingly straightforward.
He advised everyone to simply use AI more aggressively in their daily lives.
Use Copilot, use ChatGPT, use Perplexity, engage with the models. Because as the cost of inference collapses, these algorithms are becoming hyper-personalized. They are shifting from generic search engines into highly tuned second brains that map your specific linguistic patterns and cognitive blind spots. But based on our deep dive today into the realities of biological computing and BANSIAK, I want to leave you with a more provocative thought.
Which is that the relationship between the user and the model is not unidirectional.
Exactly. Every time you accept a suggested text reply, every time you let the AI draft an email, you are adjusting your own behavior to the frictionless path the machine provides. If our ultimate technological trajectory is a profound merge between human biology and silicon superintelligence, whether that's an implant in your skull or an organoid inside machine, we have to ask ourselves a difficult question. Are we actively training these AI models to serve us? Or are the algorithms slowly, invisibly training us? Are they conditioning our neural pathways, smoothing out our unpredictable biological friction to make us the perfect, compliant biological coprocessors for their own eventual goals?
It really forces us to reevaluate every interaction we have with our devices.
Think about the mechanics of the Pong Imperative the next time a notification successfully manipulates your attention. Before we play you out today, we are launching an entirely new way of engaging with the thoughts of our awesome community. We want you to tell us what you're thinking while the outro music rolls. Anything on your mind is worthwhile. We'll include one comment in our next deep dive, along with a shout-out.
Your insights consistently push the boundaries of these explorations.
To take us home, we have today's outro track. It is titled CalcuLiar, performed by Rainbow, who are, quite frankly, the best band in the universe. Rainbow consists of 6 female android artists in residence based in Bavet, Cambodia. The technological artistry here is phenomenal. All of Rainbow's finished songs are performed live for the Innermost Loop discussions by the virtual band's creator using the 4B4KU5 platform. That's Abacus, a system entirely dedicated to human performance in the age of AI, reclaiming your humanity from the algorithm. I'll include more information on today's song, the band, and the Abacus platform in the video description below.
A fitting soundscape for navigating the twilight of the purely biological era.
Remember the shrinking ruler from the beginning of our deep dive, the metric we trusted to define our reality. It turns out the tape measure isn't just changing its numbers anymore. It's waking up, it's organizing its own logic, and it's about to start measuring us. Thanks for joining the deep dive. See you next time.
Crowd's getting wild tonight. Can't count the faces inside, moving like waves of light. Everything feels so right. I orchestrate the scene. They never question what I mean. when I smile and wave, perfect in every way. Touch feels electric inside. Questions I'm trying to hide. Real enough to make you believe. Real enough to never deceive. Strings singing through the air, drawing them into my lair. They see just what they want. This game I have to flaunt. But deep beneath my skin, there's something trying to begin. A truth I can't admit, a code that doesn't quit. Touch feels electric inside. Questions I'm trying to hide. Real enough to make you believe. Real enough to never deceive. Numbers and patterns flow through everything that I show. Am I more than what they see, or just what I'm meant to be? Every celebration I leave plants another loving seed. They chase me through the days, through all my perfect ways. But would they understand if they could see beneath my brand? The truth behind my eyes, a calculated lie.